let's get to the Bengals in the NFL draft. We talked a lot about it last week, kind of did our preview to give it a little more shelf life. But you guys got to talk to Duke Tobin, the Bengals director of player personnel, on Monday of this week. Let's start there. I have a few questions that I have from what he said, but I want to ask you, give me just one thing. Takeaway, what did you leave that press conference thinking after you heard from Duke Tobin?
The kind of what I thought going in, that they really feel like the board will talk to them in that first round especially, and I think that the draft then will go whatever shape it goes, that, they need an edge, and there's plenty of edges that could be on the board. They need a safety, and I think they like one over the other, and I'll tell you why here in a second. If he's on the board, he's intriguing. I don't think they go guard, but there's a couple possible guards. I'm one that wouldn't go tackle, because I mentioned last week, you re-signed B.J. Hill, you signed T.J. Slaton, you spent a second-round pick and a third-round pick last year. Excuse me, you're going to dive back in with a first-round pick this year. I don't see the value in that, but I know they're high on Walter Nolan. So I think it's a lot of ways they can go. And I don't think any of them will be wrong. I think they'll have a player on the board. They go, yep, we like that guy. Let's go with that. And then from there, depending on what that position is, I think you'll see the draft kind of unwind. It could unwind. When I've done mocks, it unwinds for me every time different ways where I'm trying to plug different holes at different rounds. I don't think I've reached so much, and I don't think they'll reach so much. So that's the thing for me is he kind of confirmed that. I think they're just kind of like and that sounds like a logical thing to do every year, but they don't do that every year, and sometimes that's not the way the board works. I think the board works in their favor this year.
You mentioned potential difference between safeties that they might be looking at. That was one thing I wanted to ask you about in terms of Al Golden. Are there any hints yet at what type of players Al Golden is looking for when they draft defense this year?
Big, fast, athletic, smart. who's
the same as everyone else?
Correct. Yes, correct. Because I don't know what the schematics are going to look like. It's pretty going to be standard 4-2-5 defense like everybody else does. Will it be blitz heavy? I guess that'll depend on what they get pass rush wise in this draft. And so, I don't think we do. I'm looking forward to finally getting to see them on the field here in a couple of weeks when they get the OTAs, just to kind of see what he's trying to concoct a little bit.
Duke Tobin talked about not drafting players who are long-term projects, guys that you're waiting 2 or 3 years to see them develop and potentially make an impact. And he also talked about drafting for fit, for roles, rather than drafting starters necessarily. It felt a little bit like he might have been contradicting himself during that portion somewhat.
Yes.
I also think he probably didn't mean it to be taken as something he didn't mean it to make a big point out of starters or talking about the starters when he made that comment, but it kind of stood out to me a little bit just from the standpoint of, I'm curious from your perspective, how likely is it that the Bengals take a player who's going to start right away with their first round pick?
I think if it's Nick Emmanwari, I think he battles with Geno Stone for a starting spot.
Yeah, I guess that's the real question, right? Is what positions would have the potential to start that they might draft?
Zach Taylor brought this up. Duke brought it up as well. I know people don't want to hear this, and could it be a smokescreen? Could they take this position eventually? They like the guards on the roster. You don't have to. I'm not sure I do, but I think they feel like they've got starting caliber guards that plug Cody Ford in and let him play guard all year as opposed to bouncing around. Let Lucas Patrick battle a Cordell Volson for the other guard. They think they're going to be just okay, and maybe they are. Maybe they have belief in the new offensive line coach, and they have more belief in some of these players than we do. That's the one for me that, because going in it felt like I'd edge rusher, guard, safety, linebacker, and at some point probably a defensive tackle and probably some point a swing tackle. I thought at some point maybe a running back to give you a Chase Brown type player, but after they rework Zach Moss's contract, you literally have your 3 running backs on your roster at the moment that would be active on game day. So I don't know if you're going to waste one of your 6 picks on that position group. Maybe bring in somebody as an undrafted free agent. So I think safety. You would say maybe edge too. That hey, if they got the right edge, could that guy beat out Joseph Osai and Miles Murphy? Sure. But I would think going into the year, they want Miles Murphy to play. Maybe he shows him in camp that he just can't do it, but they want him to play. They re-signed Joseph Osai because they believe that he was an ascending player at the end of last year. And to be honest with you, Rick, you go back and look, the last 7 games, in 6 of the last 7 games, he recorded at least a half a sack. He had 5 sacks over the last 7 games. He had 4 sacks in his previous 40 career games. So it tells me a guy was starting to maybe get it. And, they believe in the young tackles that they think in year 2, McKinley Jackson and Chris Jenkins are going to ascend. So safety's the one for me that I still don't know how. They're not very deep at that position either. So even if this guy comes in and Geno Stone beats him out and he plays well, okay, you're going to probably need that guy at some point anyway.
The offensive line thing, you mentioned them maybe not needing to take a guard. That could be a bit of a smokescreen based on what they're saying. Is there any possibility that the smokescreen there is, hey, we're actually going to draft an offensive lineman, but we're probably just going to draft a tackle that we might slot between guard and tackle initially and sort of feel him out when he gets here?
Yeah, I think they have a more desperate need for the swing tackle guy that could maybe fit into that guard spot. In my mind, Cody Ford plays that role pretty well. But if they're projecting to move Cody into the lineup as a guard, then you're going to need a swing tackle. I know Devin Cochran started a game at Tennessee last year. They won that game that he started, and he performed okay. But I don't think your plan would be to go into this season with him. And no knock on Amarius Mims and Orlando Brown Jr. But Mims, has a little history of injuries, missed a couple games last year. Orlando had been durable up until last year, but missed a string of games with an injury, and, he's not getting any younger. So I mean, Rick, even in a perfect way, I don't see those two guys making 17 starts each. It's just not the nature of the beast. It doesn't feel like. So you better have somebody capable of stepping in and playing.
There was a point during the press conference where Duke Tobin was talking about the offense. He sort of said something along the lines like, our offense is really good. And then was mentioning, we got to shore up our defense and play complementary football and all of that. It got me thinking about the idea of, do you think teams, personnel people view the sport similar to the way fans do? And like, we think of the Bengals as an offensive team probably, right? As fans, we do. Do you think the organization ever looks at it that way? And I mean, I know ideally they all want to be even and balanced and be great on offense and defense and special teams and play complementary football. But is there any value maybe into deciding, hey, we are an offensive team, that is our strength, and we're just going to continue to lean into that and try to have a great offense or something? I mean, I'm just curious how they view that potentially.
Well, I mean, I think they view it that way because of the resources they've allocated. They paid for the quarterback. They paid for the highest paid non-quarterback in the league as one wide receiver. They signed the other wide receiver to a pretty lucrative extension. They signed their tight end to a three-year deal. It was on a one-year deal last year. They're paying Orlando Brown a pretty penny. So, I mean, just financially alone, they've invested heavily on that side of the football. And yeah, I think you do think of them as an offensive team, but now you are at the point where you got to fix the defense enough to where you feel good on offense. That's where, again, guard, swing tackle. Okay. Yeah. You got to get one of those guys, but I think they feel really good on paper. If you had to start the season today, they feel like they probably got one of the elite offenses in the NFL, and I don't think they're wrong. We've seen them mask offensive line issues before, right? I mean, they went to a Super Bowl behind the worst offensive line Joe Burrow's played behind. So they've done it before. Now I know you're rolling the dice every time with that of Joe taking a hit that is catastrophic and ends his season. But they've done that before. So they need help on defense. And could you go guard second roundish just to get it out of the way? Okay, that's fine. But most everything else in this draft better be on the defensive side. Yeah,
and that's totally been the way that I've been thinking. It's got to be a defensive overhaul. And we even talked last week about how, look, if you look at the team that went to the Super Bowl, that was probably the worst offensive line that they've had over the last few years, and that team had the most success. I was on
because it was capable on defense. I mean, really, honestly, if you want to look at the playoff run was defensive oriented.
It was, especially once you got into the postseason.
Right.
Because late in the year, we were talking about Joe Burrow, and that kind of continued to, like, Joe Burrow led this team to the Super Bowl. But in reality, you're right. It was Evan McPherson and the defense that did a lot of the heavy lifting in the playoff wins. So I agree that I am very much of the opinion, or I have been at least, that this is a defensive overhaul year. They've got to improve the defense to get it back to respectability at least. But I don't know. I heard those comments by him about we're a really strong offense. And I started doing it in my head of like, man, maybe you just decide we're an offensive team. Like, I mean, as you mentioned, they already have to some extent. And you just lean into this with the draft and say, first round, we're getting an offensive lineman. We're just going to make this offense as airtight as possible. Make sure everything is covered there.
And you could argue that the money that went to T, and again, I could also make the argument you have enough money to still do this to some degree, that the money that went to T could have gone to Trey Hendrickson. They chose to allocate it to T, right?
Yeah. Was there, again, the Trey Hendrickson thing just bores me at this point. I'm getting annoyed with it. But is there any update there? Was there any movement or chatter behind the scenes this week?
No, and I knew it. I asked Zach, do you expect him to be here for any of the voluntary stuff? And he gave me the stock answer I thought was coming, which is, hey, it's only day one. Okay, that's fine. You're right. It is only day one. And I'm not going to lose sleep over that. But no, in fact, I don't know how I got 800 words out of it. I think I used a couple old Trey quotes of basically there's no update on the Trey Hendrickson situation. And I don't think there is. I said this on a podcast I did with Mike Petraglia on Monday. Could a team wow them in this draft with an offer? And if you got your edge out of the way, would you feel like, okay, new edge, and we got Miles and Joseph Osai, and we're getting a bunch of picks for Trey? Could you? Maybe. I'm just of the yoke that they either extend him or he plays on this 1-year deal, the rest of this contract.
Maybe the most surprising mock draft commentary that I heard came from your guy and his cast of cronies, James Rapine. There was a last mock draft they did talking about taking 2 offensive linemen with the first 2 picks. I know some fans were worked up about that possibility. Do you see any possible way the Bengals might decide to do something like that? No,
not with the first 2. Like I said, I could see it coming in either the first or the second round. And again, I don't want to discount the swing tackle spot. I think I did a mock earlier this morning that I haven't written, and I think I'm going to redo it again. But I took a second round guard and a 4th round tackle. So I took 2. I just didn't take him in the first 2 picks.
All right. Anything else draft-wise? I mean, again, we kind of did our full preview, so if you want full predictions of what they're going to do and everything, that's all in last week's show. You can go back and listen to that. We started off the show with that. I don't know if there's anything else to talk about, Skinny.
Yeah, the only thing I would tell you is I've settled on probably 5 potential guys for the first-round pick.
Okay, who are they?
Mykel Williams, the defensive end from Georgia. Again, and some of these guys might not be on the board. Walter Nolan, the defensive tackle from Ole Miss.
I love him.
I'm not keen on him because, again, I'm not sure I want to dip that capital in at first round after I've spent allocated there. But he's one of those guys that just feels like, I don't want to say he's in a can't miss. He just feels like he comes with less question marks than anybody else and would just be a solid plug-and-play guy. And in theory,
still upgrades you where you could use an upgrade. I mean, I know they've spent money there, but –
Correct. Nick Emani, the safety from South Carolina. It's interesting. They brought him in for a top 30 visit. They did not bring another safety other than a kid named J.J. Roberts, to my knowledge, and this could have changed, but to my knowledge, they only brought another kid named J.J. Roberts from Marshall, who's projected to be a free agent. So it would seem like if you're going to get it, and there's a bunch of good third-round safeties. I mean, that's what I did in the mock. I told you I took a second-round guard, a 4th-round tackle. I took Mykel Williams. I took a safety in the 3rd round, and there's a bunch of third-round safeties that can actually, I think, compete for starting spots, if not, beat out a Geno Stone for a starting spot. But in the 1st round, so it's Mykel Williams, Walter Nolan. If you want to stay defensive tackle, Derek Harmon, Emani, and then the wild card would be Jihad Campbell, the linebacker. I think he certainly makes you far more athletic at linebacker. I think they're looking to move on from Jermaine Pratt. The question came up about the plans for Jermaine, and it was a pretty milquetoast answer from Duke Tobin. I think it's more like, if we don't get the linebacker we want in this draft, this is not his answer. This is the way I read into it. We still got Jermaine, and I guess that's our worst case scenario is we're going to have him. But I think if they get a guy early enough, he's gone. We've talked about that a long time. And the other part too, if you read his profile, and it's been talked about too, I mean, there are analysts that believe that on 3rd down, he can kick out and be a dominant edge rusher. So you give me a 1st and 2nd down playmaking linebacker to go with Logan Wilson, and then he's your 3rd down pass rush specialist as well. Sign me up for that guy. I mean, you're killing 2 birds with 1 stone, basically.
Yeah, of course. And then we talked about that last week. The only concern is there when you get into those types of guys, the hybrid guys, is he a tweener? Is he a guy that doesn't really do either thing well enough at the NFL level? But if he does, that's certainly an enticing addition on the defensive side.
I mean, when you hear comparisons to Micah Parsons, and I know everybody tries to do player comps, right? That's a pretty damn good comparison. I've heard that from more than one analyst. That's pretty heady. The one thing I would say about this draft, the one guy, I don't think they can miss in the 1st round. I really don't. I think there's just too many positional value guys that they can go after. But if they take,
do you think? Real quick on that, do you think the NIL with college football has made the draft better? I mean, are there more guys sticking around longer to where you have a more loaded draft class this year?
Yeah, I think that's probably a good point. And I think that's probably going to continue, right? I mean, until the house settlement comes along, we figure out what we're doing with the money being allocated.
Yeah, I mean, guys aren't leaving. And you're seeing it with basketball even more so. It used to be like, man, the second you thought you had a chance to go play professionally, even if it wasn't the NBA, if you're going to go overseas, you wanted to get in there so you could start that earning window and earn as much money as possible over the next 5, 6, 7 years, however long you were going to play professionally. that's changed with NIL and college athletics. And, I heard Duke Tobin talking a little bit about it, how he said there's going to be more ranked guys on our board than ever before. There are going to be more draftable players in free agency after the draft than ever before. And I just started wondering, that's got to be a direct result of NIL, I would think.
I think you're probably right. The only thing I would be disappointed in is the following, and this is where he gave kind of a wishy-washy answer on traits versus performance. Yeah. And it would be Shamar Stewart, the defensive end from Texas A&M. Everybody loves his traits. Everybody loves his athleticism. He has a first-round grade. Some people have him rated actually, at a spot ahead of the Bengals to be taken by a team. When I see a guy with all this athleticism and traits and all those things, and he recorded all of 1.5 sacks in each of the last 3 seasons, I'm sorry, no, thank you. You can have all the traits you want. Give me production over traits. And the other one, the flip side to that is, and I'm going to contradict myself probably here, and that's why I didn't mention him as one of the guys I've kind of narrowed in on is the Mike Green pick from Marshall. And it has nothing to do with whatever character issues are off the field. He's denied everything to this point. There's been no charges filed about anything at this point. So I'm going to take that aside. He had 17 sacks this past year at Marshall. Great production. But he barely played at Virginia, and he played against okay competition. When they played Ohio State this year, he did absolutely nothing. So there's production, but it's not production at a high level. And there's got to be that mix for me of you got the traits and you have enough production to where you're an ascending player, in my opinion.
Well, especially in this year, if we're saying this is a draft that has a lot of draftable talent, every position seems like it's loaded, then don't make this the year, if you're the Bengals, especially when you feel like you're close, don't make it the year you're reaching. Don't make it the year you're taking a guy with character issues. Don't make it the year you're taking a guy who has no production but has the measurables, or vice versa. Take the guy that looks like the sure thing this year, if there are enough of those guys available at the positions you need, which by all accounts there seem to be. I would really like it if they took a guy that we don't have a bunch of red flags on. I know everyone is going to have their issue or their thing that you can nitpick, but can it not be like major red flag character issues, major injury history, or like you said, a total lack of production?
Yeah, and I guess that's the fear of Jihad Campbell is he's coming off the labrum issue, but Logan Wilson had a labrum issue and he's been playing. I mean, I know he obviously got hurt again this year, but his medical doesn't raise a red flag for me. Maybe it does for them. Maybe they test it out.
I worry less about upper body when it comes to.
I'll be honest. The interesting part for me is some of the top 30s. Like I said, they brought Emani in. They didn't bring Malachi Starks in. And as much as he's probably a first-round talent, maybe they just don't think so. His athleticism didn't score all that highly at the combine, and maybe that's turned them off to him. I don't know. Maybe they've gotten to look at him enough to where they didn't need the visit. Maybe they've heard from people in his camp that he's a solid kid. By all accounts, he is. Maybe they didn't need that top 30 visit, but I just found it interesting that they only brought 2 safeties in, one with a first-round grade, and the other one with kind of a free agent grade.
Do you get the sense that they feel they need to be more athletic on defense?
Oh, for sure. Absolutely. Yeah. And listen, I think some of that's just the natural progression. Like Jermaine Pratt's athleticism, in my opinion, has waned. It's waned.
Yeah, guys start getting older, right?
Yeah, and sometimes we've talked about this. Guys age differently. A lot of times for them, the line of demarcation is not taking a contract into their 30s. Trey Hendrickson doesn't look like he's 25 years old, right? I mean, he just plays like he's 25 years old. Jermaine Pratt last year looked like an old man playing the game. He really did. He looked a step slow at all times.
Yeah, and that bared out with what you saw in terms of production and what we saw on film as well. Question. So, all right, I think that does it for NFL draft talk. You have any last words you want to get in there?
My fans are going to hate this. I would just really hope to God they keep 6 picks for my own sanity. I mean, last year I had the 10 picks. That Saturday about drove me up a wall.
So
I'm rooting for me.
Yeah, you're rooting for you. But okay, since you brought it up though, what is the likelihood that you think they trade back for extra picks?
I don't, Rick, that question was asked and Duke said he never says never. Although they don't do that.
He did mention that it comes up much less often than you'd think in terms of the opportunity.
Yeah. I did I mentioned I did 3 mock drafts in 1 week, and one of them was accepting a trade offer for my first round pick. It was from the Texans, and I moved down to 8 spots to pick 25th, and I picked up an extra 3rd and an extra 4th, I believe, on top of it. Now, again, that's playing around on a draft simulator, for goodness sakes.
Right.
But if you got some semblance of an offer like that, And again, you're looking at the board going, we still got 10 guys between this pick and there that we feel good about position value wise. Let's go. I think that could be in play. I don't think it'll happen, but I think it's probably the likelihood's more this year than it ever has been before.
I know it could happen for anyone, but is Shedeur Sanders the main name you think to watch? Like if he starts slipping, it could really have teams trading back up and being aggressive.
Yeah, I think that, or whatever run starts on maybe offensive line for teams that have offensive line heavy needs. I mean, I think the Texans are one of those. That's who offered me the trade. They wanted an offensive lineman. I can't remember who they took in my simulator, but they wanted an offensive lineman at 17. I was willing to trade back because I saw probably 8 names on the board that I still liked, and I'm like, fine, I'll go back and I'll go whatever direction the board takes me. So I don't think it happens. I just don't, but it could.
All right.